No one can be independent of other people completely, so why not give up the attempt, she thought. Go running in the other direction. Depend on people for everything. Allow them to depend on you. Welcome to AMI Audiobook Review, the weekly podcast where we chat all things audiobooks with myself, Ramya Amuddin, Jacob Shymansky,
hello,
producer and co-host, as well as technical producer Nasreen Abdel-Majid. We start off with a quote of the week. Oh my god, why am I running so ahead of this? It's 2024. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Yeah.
Ramya, that was such a good read. You should be reading audiobooks. I would listen to that in a heartbeat.
Really? Well, Thank you. You know, that's why I pick
good.
long quotes, because I'm trying to use them as part of my demo reel to get hired as a narrator. So thanks for noticing.
Oh, is that why you put it right at the top of the show?
Yeah,
oh, I see.
Exactly.
They got longer.
Agreement?
But
yeah, all the quotes get longer. Well, that's what happens when Jacob tells me to pick the quote. Okay, I'll just pick the novel.
well, tell us about this one. Why'd you pick this one?
It's nice. Okay, so this one is from Normal People by Sally Rooney, and this is the first book that I've read by this author. Basically, it was a TikTok recommendation, okay? I was flipping through TikTok, scrolling, and somebody said, oh my gosh, it's a life-changing book. That's all it really took, honestly. I went straight to Audible and downloaded it. Oh, he said it's about relationships. And I thought, perfect. I love, the psyche and the mind and all the things that I say we should not be doing, like psychoanalyzing everybody. Yeah, I love it. So went straight to the book. It was a great and very easy read, like 7 hours or so. I loved it. I highly recommend it. But that was what I spent my holiday doing mostly, guys, reading. So
break down the quote, though. Like, how do you interpret that? I'm finding it a bit confusing.
Really? I mean, I think it's that concept of interdependence, right? You know how we often talk about independence and sometimes fiercely independence as not such a great thing or a great lifestyle choice. And then also codependency has this kind of negative connotation also where, you're going into each other more than able to hold yourself up. But then there's this concept of interdependency. And I think this quote kind of conveys that, where you're like, there's no need to pretend like we don't need each other, right? And whether it be community building or just the letting go of the notion of I must do it all myself. There you go. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. It's relinquishing control to society and saying it's okay if we rely on each other. That's
okay.
fine.
It's all good.
Okay.
We all need each other.
I get that.
We all need the help.
I get that.
Yeah. Exactly. We're going to talk a little bit less about what we've been reading over the holidays and a little bit more about 2024 and where we're going with reading trends, right? So like top 10 books of 2023, what that may look like for 2024. Karen Mackay from our Center for Equitable Library Access friends is going to be joining us to talk more about that. You guys have picked, Jacob, you and Karen have picked a couple different lists that we want to go through. And then we have an audiobook listener joining us, the first ever of 2024, and that's Julia Bonett. She is now coined the voice of AMI Audio. I don't even think she knows it yet, so we're going to break that news to her. And we'll talk about what she's been reading through Rapid Fire Review. Looking forward to it. So, before we get to all that, let's take a quick look at the CELA homepage. If you visit celalibrary.ca, you will find these 3 featured titles at the very top. The Mystery Guest, Molly the Maid, number 2 by Nina Prose. Suspense and thriller novel for all of you guys kicking off that way. Oath and Honor by Liz Cheney, and this is politics and government biography. And The Biddlemores by Jen Arden, and this is a gentle mysteries. Okay, let's get into it. CELA Talk once a month. We check in with Karen Mackay and Teresa Power, but Teresa's not able to join us today. Karen's the communications manager over there, and it's nice to have you on as our first guest of the year. Welcome.
Thanks so much. It's nice to be here. We missed you guys.
Yeah, we missed you too. So do you want to tell us what you read over the holidays or are in the midst of reading now that you picked up over the holidays?
Yeah, so I bought my daughter an Emma Donoghue book for Christmas called The Pull of the Stars, which was published, I think it's 2020, might be 2021. Anyway, she's a big Emma Donoghue fan. She's read a couple of them. And so we're reading it together. So I bought myself another copy and we're reading it together and talking about it as we go through. So the book was published, yeah, it was 2020 because it was published during the early days um, of COVID, of all the lockdowns, and it's about a pandemic. And it was not obviously planned because she'd written it a couple of years before, but it's a very interesting book to read in hindsight around COVID and the plague that's happening in this book. And Emma Donoghue is just such a captivating writer. So both my daughter and I really, really love her work. So we're excited to be reading that one together.
Awesome. Along with my partner, we also read a book together, the Good Girl's Guide to Murder series. We read all three over the holidays.
Get out.
Yeah. And it's so much fun.
You guys started this before the holidays.
Yes, a little bit before
right?
the holidays.
Like this trend of kind of audiobook listening
but
together?
We read the last two during the holidays. And it's fun because it's a murder mystery. So at the end of every chapter, you summarize and you theory craft. It's a very engaging genre. I also picked up Thank You for Listening by Julia Whalen, which really, really, really good book. I loved my Oxford year as well, and this one was on par. And that's saying a lot.
Yeah, exactly. First of all, I'm glad you're done the series, right? Now, that Gentle Mystery series, or that Good Girl's Guide to Murder?
Yeah, we finished it up.
It's over? Okay. All right. Well, tell us when the next co-reading is in the horizons.
Oof.
Because it was fun hearing about it.
I will. I mean, we started a new one. It's not nearly as good. We're about halfway through. What is it called again? One of Us is Lying by I forget her name, but it's very mid.
To clarify, I forget her name is not like the the author's pen name or something. Anyways, the second book that I picked up that I'm not done yet. I'm kind of taking it chapter by chapter, but I'm really enjoying like the science behind happiness. It's by Arthur C. Brooks and co-written by Oprah Winfrey. And you know how we talked about this just heading into the holidays with you, Karen, and Teresa about co-authoring. So it was kind of fun picking this up because we got the psychiatrist, Arthur Brooks, and it's called Build the Life You Want. But basically, the interesting part is the brain response to chemicals and emotions that then result in happiness or unhappiness. So he does the breakdown. Oprah does the, pep talks for us. And it's quite interesting. And they both narrate it as well.
Okay, see.
I love hearing
Oh, that's
Oprah.
cool.
This is interesting. So it's about the chemical imbalances or balances in your brain that result in what we
interpret as
happiness.
Unhappiness. Yes.
Did you find that
obviously
like a little like reductionist? Like does it not?
No, there's a lot of breakdown. There's a lot of stats that he's pointing to in studies, small and big. But also, yes, there is that, self-development side, which is you can be happier. Just here's how you do it.
Just had to crank up your numbers of this chemical and this will make you happy.
Or like the interpretation. Yeah. No, I'm reducing it to that. But there's way more conceptually than the way that I explain it. I'm rapid fire reviewing myself. It's not good.
You're rapid firing yourself in the foot.
Yeah, right. Okay.
But
and on that note,
we should look ahead at what 2024 is going to be like in terms of trends. And I think the best way of doing that is by seeing what was trendy in 2023 because it's still very fresh. Karen, you brought us the top 10 downloaded books on CELA in 2023. Do you want to help us go through it? Maybe analyze some of the themes that are in there? I think first things first is we should read through the 10 titles.
So number 1 was Spare by Prince Harry, which we talked about on this show in quite a bit of depth.
Right, no surprise.
And then we had no surprise there. Yeah, that was not a surprise to anybody, I don't think. Then we had The Whispers by Ashley Audrain, another one that we talked about in depth on this show.
Completely
so maybe
reviewed,
this show is, maybe this show is the one that's
we are the top 10.
Influencing our top 10s. And then we had Hotline by Dimitri Nazrallah, who's a Canadian, and this is a novel, but it sticks pretty close, I think, to elements of his life. So, I he says it's a novel, but I suspect there's real life elements in there. Maybe sort of it's a bit memoir-ish. Then we have The Boys from Biloxi by John Grisham, who needs no introduction. Is There Bacon in Heaven? Another memoir by Ali Hassan, which is he's a Canadian author and stand-up comedian. Folks probably are well familiar with him. The number 6 book was The House in the Pines by Anna Reyes. She's a debut novelist, but this was a Reese Book Club title, so Reese Witherspoon. So again, not a huge surprise to see this on our list. Then we had Page Boy by Elliot Page, again another Canadian actor and another memoir. Mm-hmm.
Very well received, yeah.
Yeah, and lots of conversations around that book, like a long conversations around that book.
Yeah.
Number 8 was a bit of a surprise to me. It's The Wager, A Tale of Shipwreck, Mutiny, and Murder by David Grann, who's also the author of Killers of the Flower Moon. So folks are probably familiar with that, with the movie that was released just a month or two ago. Anyway, so this one is historical nonfiction from an event that happened over 200 years ago. A shipwrecked British, I believe, was boat was there was a shipwreck. There was a mutiny. The captain was left on a deserted island and ends up back in England 2 or so years later to talk about his experiences. So we don't often see this kind of book on our top 10 down list. So it was interesting to me that this was on here. And then the last 2 were Every Summer After by Carly Fortune, a Canadian author. This is a beach read kind of book. She's very popular. And A White Lady, a novel by Jacqueline Winspear. She's a British author. She's the author of the Maisie Dobbs series, so folks might be familiar with her. It's sort of a sweeping historical fiction kind of book, and it's a bit of a cozy mystery as well. And so this one is again a bit of a surprise, but I think she probably has quite a legion of fans in the CELA audiences, so not super surprised to see this one on the list. So those were our downloads, and the interesting thing I thought was, one, the number of memoirs or memoir-ish books that are on here. Like we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 out of 10. Yeah, so that's a pretty big number for memoirs. And I think memoirs actually were big this year. I mean, there's always memoirs that are big around Christmas time. That's when they tend to release them, so that there's, lots of Christmas purchases and stuff.
Right. I was going to say, I'm surprised that the Britney Spears book, The Woman in Me, wasn't on this list, but I'm thinking that's because it was released in the last quarter of the year, right?
Later. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, probably. And also, to be fair, our readers trend a bit older in general, so I'm not sure that Britney Spears resonated with them in the same way that Prince Harry might have, or even Elliot Page, as a
That's
Canadian.
fair.
And so that was sort of an interesting look at some of the top books in our collection, and it, to be honest, I was kind of impressed with our readers, with the variety and also the depth of some of the works here. Like sometimes we see lighter reads or easier reads, but these ones, most of them are quite substantial. And with the memoir piece, it's really a diverse set of memoirs, right? Like we've got Prince Harry, we've got Ali Hassan, we've got Elliot Page, we've got it's a novel by Dimitri Nazarella, but it feels memoirish. And so, to have those books, they're very diverse. They're about very diverse people, very diverse experiences. To have those in our top 10, I thought was kind of impressive, to be honest.
I was thinking the same about just the variety and depth of the content, Karen, in terms of memoirs, but memoirs more largely representing, communities and struggles and different things that we've been really getting into the last few years anyways. I'm thinking like the Indigenous community and LGBTQ plus representation, but not necessarily just that. It's more our willingness to deep dive into people and community experiences that way.
I think that's a really interesting point, and actually it's really well reflected in the CBC list that we will be talking about as well, because a lot of those books are not published in 2023, and it's interesting to see what people are coming back to or are exploring. I don't know if we want to jump into that now, but for example, Five Little Indians by Michelle Good, which was published in 2020, is on that list, as is I just want to make sure I get the title right. 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act by Bob Joseph, which has been out for years.
Mm,
Talking about Indigenous experience, not only learning about it, but also what can we do? Like, how can we make this better? How can we commit as non-Indigenous folks to, to the truth and reconciliation elements that we've been talking about for years? Like, it just feels like there's maybe some momentum behind it that's keeping books like the 21 Things You May Not Know or Michelle Good's book, front and center for 3 years, 4 years. I mean, that's an
yeah.
important, I think, thing to take a look at.
Yeah, there's clearly a cultural shift towards wanting to understand the lives of Indigenous peoples and everything that goes on around them. Let's take a look at the CBC list. Karen, do you want to go through the list?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So the number one book on the list is Ducks by Kate Beaton, which is a graphic novel, and it's been nominated for all kinds of different awards. Second is Greenwood by Michael Christie. This was published in 2019 and was a Scotiabank Giller Prize longlist a book, and also won a couple of awards as well. Five Little Indians by Michelle Good, we just talked about that, was published in 2020. The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate and his son Daniel Mate, which talks about why chronic illness and general health problems are on the rise in Western countries. Women Talking by Miriam Taves, and that was probably driven by the fact that the movie called Women Talking by Sarah Polley came out in late December 2022.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Bad Cree by Jessica Johns. This is a debut novel by a Canadian author, also talking about Indigenous issues. The Sleeping Car Porter by Suzette Mayer is number 7. It won the 2022 Scotiabank Giller Prize. And The Marrow Thieves by Sherry Dimeline. This book's been on a lot of top lists. It was published in 2018 actually. So it's been around for a long time, but it's been optioned and they're currently working on a TV series for that. The 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act by Bob Joseph, which we just talked about as well. And the last one on the list, number 10, is Old Babes in the Woods by Margaret Atwood. I hear that title in her speech patterns every time I say it. So those are the top 10 from the CBC list, which is based on book sales at bookshops across the country. And so I think it's a really interesting list, as we just talked about, because clearly there are themes. We've got a few Indigenous authors or books about Indigenous issues on the list,
Right.
but we've also got one about environmental collapse in Greenwood by Michael Christie. We've got Ducks by Kate Beaton, which is an autobiographical graphic novel about a young woman and her experiences working in the oil sands. So that's really pretty topical as well. Women Talking, my favorite film by far of 2022. It's a fantastic book. It's a fantastic movie. So
Did you read the book as well, Karen?
I'm one of the people that
Okay.
bought the book. It's sitting on my list. I've read
Oh,
parts of it
lovely.
for work. Yeah, I've read parts of it for work, but I really want to sit down and read it sort of wholly, cover to cover.
So well written. Yeah.
Did you like it as a book?
I found it to be so deep. I mean, it's really just a discussion. Anytime I pick up a book like this, I never leave thinking that I didn't learn anything. Like, it just captivates you because you're taking part in the conversation, but also it's like every perspective, every which way, every personality and character. And then you get pieces of people that, you formed an opinion and then you learn something else about this person. You're like, oh, okay, well, that makes more sense now, right? Like, it just keeps diving deeper and deeper. And I
I
really
think it's
appreciate books that are
one of
written this
those
way.
books that sits with you. Like, it's one of,
Absolutely.
some books you pick up and you put down and, a few months
It's
later, you're like,
gone.
I read it, but I don't remember it.
Mm.
But this one, I think it sits at the core. For folks who don't know, it's about a Mennonite colony in, Belize? No.
Uh, yeah.
Help. Do you remember? Anyway, they, the women catch the men abusing women and young girls, and the men leave because some of them have been arrested. So they go to retrieve them, and the women have 24 hours to decide whether to stay or to go and what to do about the situation. And so it's literally about women talking what to do with their lives. And it's just it's profound in so many ways.
Yeah. Uh, Also, Manitoba colony in Bolivia is where it takes
Bolivia,
place.
right? Thank you.
Yes.
Wait, what do
And
you
it
mean a
was
Manitoba
Whew.
colony?
they're based in Manitoba now. Miriam Taves was I don't know, Mennonite. She
Yes.
was raised Mennonite, and they, I believe, were on some sort of um, mission. They're connected to the Manitoba colony.
Oh, okay, I
Yeah.
understand. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But quite good. And I can't not, like, I can't erase Teresa's comment when she watched the movie and she said she just bawled her eyes out. Now, that didn't happen to me because I didn't watch the movie. And I feel like, something like this portrayed in this sense of a movie would be uh, just,
Yeah.
you would have an emotional response to it like that. The book I thought was a bit different, like the way I responded to the book. But yeah, still
The book
highly
is written
recommended if you
from
haven't
the
read it.
perspective of the only male in the
Yes, August. Yeah,
Oh, I was
yeah.
not expecting that.
Uh,
Wow.
he
no,
is basically the minute keeper.
yeah.
He's taking
Uh,
minutes. That's the way that this book is written. He's
but the
taking minutes of the
movie,
meetings of the women.
yeah, the movie is not, his voice is not centered, so
Exactly.
it's a different kind of experience. And yeah, I
Mm.
was with Teresa. My daughter and I were crying through the whole thing. So
Mm.
anyway, didn't want to turn this into a women talking thing, but if you haven't
Yeah,
read the book or you haven't seen the movie, highly recommend.
highly. Okay.
Um,
Did we go through
so
the
we
whole book list of
But,
CBC? No,
well,
right?
we did just a little bit of a blurb on each of them. What I find interesting about this book, and really even about the seal, or sorry, this list, and really even about the CELA list, is that unlike some of the literary lists that you might see in the New York Times or the Globe and Mail or whatever, these books tend to be driven by more sort of bestseller lists, more common conversation lists,
Right. It's more
like,
populist,
folks
right?
telling. It's exactly. It's also driven by books with big marketing budgets, and it's driven more by, I think, some of the literary awards. Like, we've got a couple of award winners on here, which is interesting to me. I know that some booksellers love awards and some don't, because they don't always believe that the best books get the most promotion. Sometimes it's, who's got the money or who's got the star power. I think it's a really interesting collection of books. The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate is a nonfiction book. He's an author that writes a lot about really interesting topics, everything from parenting to ADHD to addiction. And in this book, he's talking about chronic illness and general health problems, which is kind of out of left field on a, top
Mm.
10 book list. But I think it reflects a really interesting um, thing that we're talking about generally, like our healthcare systems and how do we stay well in the midst of a pandemic and other things that are going on, and why are we struggling so much with health as a culture and as a community. And so, I think it's a really interesting insight to see what are the most popular books and who's reading them, and how they tie or do not tie together to other themes.
I think it's pretty important to note that a lot of these books on these two lists do have big names attached to them, like
Right.
Margaret Atwood and Prince Harry and John Grisham. Like, I
Mm.
think you can't forget that these books are like, they have a lot of star power behind them, and that counts. Like, just anecdotally speaking, like when we're talking about books on this show and giving recommendations, every time there's like a big name attached to it, especially if it's a memoir, we all go, "Oh, that sounds cool."
That's a fair point. And yeah, and just because they're not new, right? Like, the variety here is that some of these books, at least across the board and on the two lists, are debut novels or debut memoirs, first time writing of. And then others are just like, yeah, of course you're going to pick up this book because it's an author you love or a person you're very familiar with the writing already.
I'm actually surprised at how many debut novels are on these lists as well, because there's quite a few of them,
Yeah, that's
which,
true.
Yeah,
they
that
might
have
have a
made the
bigger,
top 10 lists.
yeah, they might have a bigger marketing budget for some reason, or not. But I mean, Bad Cree by Jessica John, she's a debut author, and really kind of came out of nowhere. She had won a prize for the short story version of this book 2 or 3 years before this one was published. But it really, like, not, she's a Canadian Indigenous author. There's not a lot of marketing power behind her. And so,
Mm-hmm.
but she made the top list, like she was in the top 6, and her book came out in the summer. So only sort of had half a year to generate that kind of buzz. And, there's Sherry Dimoline's books. She was a debut author. Who else is debut? Michelle Good was a debut author. Ducks, the number one book.
Yeah.
Kate Beaton, debut author. This is from the CBC list. So, really, there's a fair amount. I don't think Elliot Page had written anything before. I'm not sure
Right.
whether Ali Hassan had. So there's a lot of, from an author perspective, there's a lot of authors that are new on
Exactly.
these 2 lists. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's quite
So
interesting.
I'd like to feature the one on Goodreads especially,
Oh,
because
okay.
this one
Do
seems
it.
really interesting to me. So, Goodreads is another one of those lists where it's very voter driven. Like it has over 200,000 voters cast for like just this category alone, the fiction category. This one is Yellowface by R.F. Klung. Let me read you the synopsis because it actually sounds awesome. Athene Alou is a literary darling, and June Hayward is literally nobody. White lies. When Athena dies in a freak accident, June steals her unpublished manuscript and publishes it at her own under the ambiguous name Juniper Song. But as
Ooh.
evidence threatens June's threatened success, she will discover exactly how far she will go to keep what she thinks she deserves. With its totally immersive first-person voice, Yellowface grapples with questions of diversity, racism, and cultural appropriation, as well as the terrifying alienation of social media.
That is so intriguing.
That's what I thought
I
too.
would pick up this book based on the synopsis. Had you guys heard of this before? This is the first time.
I have, yeah. I briefly heard about it on BookTube. This is one of those books where it seems to unanimously have really good reviews. This one's definitely on my TBR.
Yeah.
it's also a
Mm-hmm.
Reese Book Club pick, and Stephen
Oh,
King
okay.
reviewed it with he said it was hard to put down, harder to forget. So
Mm.
really, I think, it does
Whoa.
have a bit of marketing power behind it for sure, but also it sounds like a really interesting premise for a book. Like, I'm intrigued.
Same. I'm definitely intrigued. And the thing is, I don't know. This is the time of the year when you add everything, right? Like absolutely everything, because now you're reflecting back on the. I'm serious. You're reflecting back on the year of like best books
Yes,
ever
and
of
all these lists are coming
2023.
out at the same time. You're like, oh my god, how
I
did I miss this?
know. Yeah, and then even with amongst friends, family, other avid readers, you're hearing like, yeah, this was my top book of 2023 by far, and things like that, and where you're like, okay. So as you said, to read list, expands. Like I think I've added at least 4 books just from this conversation onto my list.
Yeah, eventually you have to get rid of some of those books on your to read list.
By reading them, right?
No, just by
Oh,
deleting them.
okay. Wow. Okay. Um.
There's only so much time in the world.
Yeah. Karen, do you get caught in these kind of like, oh, must read because top books
I
of?
I do, for sure. So I have to do a lot of reading for work, for my job with CELA, and for other work that I do. And so I have a growing list of books that I want to read just for me, but don't always get to them. And I dislike having to delete them off my to-do list because most of them are ones that are really intriguing one way or another. So
Mm.
yeah, I definitely get that. And there are books that I read parts of for CELA that I'm like, "Oh, I really want to read the whole thing, but I have 4 more that I have to, get a
Wow.
synopsis of."
Oof.
So
We've
yeah,
never talked about this.
yeah, it's
Have
hard to
we?
do. We haven't. And Teresa has time to read, like she has allocated time to read, but she finds the same thing because she reads a lot of books for different awards that she's involved in. And so she's got a huge list of books she wants to read, but she's also reading a lot for work. And it's a bit of a bummer to have all these books that you want to read and then all these books that you need to read, some of which are really interesting, but you can't get to them all. You just can't.
But wait,
Yeah.
if you're reading for work, does that kind of bring down your love of reading a little bit, seeing as you're doing it as part of your job?
Yeah, even if it's all this variety in genres, just the fact that
Yeah,
you can't get through these things.
yes and no. Part of it's just like I just feel like I abandon a lot of things, which is challenging for sure. And
Uh,
I'm taking classes, so I'm also reading for school. So yeah, I do
Mm.
miss the opportunity to really delve into a book and finish it and savor it, which I don't always get to do.
Yeah. All right. Well, Yellowface by R.F. Kuang is actually available on CELA in human narration. So shout out. Thank you. Added to the list. Karen, appreciate you all always coming on the show. Thank you so much. We'll catch up with you and Teresa next month.
My pleasure. Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New
Cheers.
Year. Karen Mackay from the Center for Equitable Library Access. She'll be back with Teresa next month. And after the break, we got another audiobook listener joining us. We've got rapid fire review lined up with her, Julia Bonett, voice of audio on AMI Audiobook Review. Welcome back. It's AMI Audiobook Review, the weekly podcast where we chat all things audiobooks. So we have our first guest of the year, like not regular contributor, but an avid audiobook worm. We think her voice would be familiar to any AMI Audio listener because she's the voice behind AMI Audio Station IDs, the voice of AMI Audio, if you will. So says Jacob. But most importantly, like I said, massive audiobook worm. Welcome, Julia Bonett. Julia, it's been so long since we've actually talked with you.
Hi, you guys. Yes, I'm so glad to be back and talking with the AMI audience and you guys as well.
And you know, you were one of our first guests. If I'm not mistaken, I feel like you were our first guest on this show. I might be wrong, but if you were
Really?
either the first or the second guest of AMI Audiobook Review at our inception. Yes.
Well, I remember it was just getting going
It was.
when I did come
And
on.
Andy's
And
like-
yeah.
Andy Frank, manager
Fantastic.
of AMI Audio, was like, you should probably get Julia on. You know, she'll kickstart the show for you. And I
She'll
will go
talk.
back. I will
She'll go
follow
blah,
up.
blah, 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 blah.
She
That's what you
reads.
want.
She reads, even if you guys don't.
She'll
got
carry
to.
the show.
I will go back and I will follow through on this point, but I'm pretty sure you were either a first or second guest on the show. So it's actually lovely
Wow.
to have you back on. So where are we starting?
Let's
Our
start
favorite
where
place.
I think we all want to actually start
Yep.
with the rapid fire review.
Let's go.
Yeah?
Oh,
Yeah.
boy.
All
No
right.
waiting
Okay.
I'll give you a reminder of the rules again. Julia kindly provided us with 5 of her most recent notable reads. You have 15 seconds for each book to give a quick rapid fire review. After we get through all 5 books, you get to choose one of them to expand on, rant, rave, whatever you want to say about it.
Okay.
All right?
You nervous? Just kidding.
I'm totally nervous.
Don't be nervous.
I'm speechless nervous. That's not a good thing.
People always do better than they think they will.
Okay.
Okay.
Rams, what's
All
the
right.
first title?
All right. We have Trust by Hernan Diaz.
Okay, so this is a Pulitzer Prize winner. I loved it because it had the same story through 4 different perspectives. I enjoyed the characters. I would totally recommend it to anybody who wants to be involved in a puzzle, figuring out.
Oh.
Oh, that sounds good.
Oh, that was a yes.
I love those different
Yeah.
perspective books. That's
Oh, you know, I was
puzzle.
halfway through that book before I figured out what it was about.
No
Like,
way.
even began to figure out what it's about. Yeah. So
Oh
Hmm.
gosh, that
you have to
requires
be
a lot
a
of
little
patience.
dedicated.
Yeah.
But
that's one of those how do you say that?
Rubik's cubes.
Oh my god, the word's escaping me.
That
That's
too,
that's one of those
yeah.
books where you're furrowing your brow the whole time.
Well,
Right.
I mean, I
Oh, right.
was, but it was a fun kind of question mark over my head more than a furrowed brow, I would say. You know, like-
Okay.
and it got better. It got way better at the end. Big payoff.
All right. Next book is Rusk by Edward Rutherford.
Okay, so another historical fiction kind of thing, and it covers 1800 years of Russian history
Oh.
through the residents of this one little village called Ruska. Big time span, all sorts. Historical stuff.
Wait, is this historical fiction or a history book?
Well, it's history. It's not. It's a novel. It's a novel.
So it's
but
not
it is
nonfiction.
covers. It's not nonfiction. Sorry, yeah, and it is definitely there's drama, right? But it is a mythical town. It's not a real town, Ruska, and it's sort of you get to interact with some real figures, like you hear about Ivan the Terrible, but you know. And he's actually, he's in the story, but not for long, because if you can imagine 1800 years, you got to pack in a lot of characters.
Wow. Okay,
in
but
one novel.
this was a cheat, by the way. We gave you 15 seconds, and then you went on for another 45.
I'm keep going. I'm so sorry. It's just
Kidding,
I'm a rule
kidding.
breaker at heart.
Yeah.
No.
We're very
all right.
lenient referees.
Yeah,
here.
we are.
Oh, thank
That's because we
God.
were genuinely intrigued. How many years of Russian history did you say? Discovered?
1800.
Wow. Okay. Wow.
Yeah, that's Edward. It's Edward Rutherford's thing, right?
All right.
To do. Anyway.
Okay. Next one. Familiar title. Born a Crime by Trevor Noah.
Oh, fantastic book. Totally an education about apartheid, but way more, and one man's sort of navigation of that. Touching, shocking, definitely entertaining. I would definitely recommend to everybody.
Nice.
Ooh,
Nice.
perfect
That was
timing,
nice.
dude. That
Yeah.
was smooth.
But it is amazing how long 15 seconds is. They're going, God, I got to talk more.
Like everybody's knows what this book is about. I don't know what else to tell you about it.
Yeah, exactly.
I think
Yeah,
we've all
no,
read
fantastic book.
that book.
Yeah.
around
At
this
least around the
table.
table. Yep.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Really, really good.
I sort of suspected it. Yeah, because it
Too
was a
good.
huge hit.
Yeah.
For sure.
All right. The Country of the Blind by Andrew Leland.
Probably also familiar to you guys. This is the navigation of the landscape of the blind community in a very literate kind of way, what it means to be blind. I like being able to grapple with some of the intellectual questions that he was bringing up and to come to my own conclusions.
I
Oh.
had no idea about this book.
Yeah,
Oh,
I
really?
never heard of it either.
Mm-mm.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, well, it was kind of a big thing over the last year or so, maybe 6 months to 8 months.
We're living on a rock.
This is Neil Simon's grandson, Andrew Leland.
Interesting.
You know, like the playwright and
Yeah.
Neil Simon. So he's yeah. Anyway, I don't want to
I'm very
go
curious
break the
now.
rules anymore.
All right. No, you're good. We got to expand anyways at
So
one point.
rebellious.
Yeah, well, we could do that.
So
Sure.
rebellious. Okay, here. This is the last one, your fifth choice for rapid fire review, and it is 3 Cheers for Me, Donald Jack.
Okay, so this book is actually an old friend that I picked up again, and it won the Stephen Leacock Award for Humor in the 60s. Very funny, very silly, about a World War I Canadian pilot and soldier. Very farcical, very silly.
Repetition.
Sorry, wasn't allowed to do
emphasis.
that.
For
Huh.
emphasis. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, no, it's not exactly politically correct silliness, but it's still funny.
All
Yeah.
right.
How does it hold up? It's from the
Yeah.
60s, right? How does it hold up?
Because you picked it up again. So.
Well, I mean, you may have detected there's a bit of a theme in some of my reading, which is about history, right? And this is, you know, a historical document, right? So in a way, it's talking about personalities and such, but it's kind of this bumbling guy who somehow makes it to the top of the ranks in the army, and then as a pilot, and becomes this hugely famous pilot. It holds up really well. You do have to overlook a couple of things that, you know, maybe we would not want to see in a book now, maybe, but it is a historic. It's from its time, right? But it's so funny, like so. Yeah, that's.
Do you?
I say give it a go.
Yeah, and I'm curious if you go looking for these kinds of books. Like obviously you picked, you know, your top 5 for this purpose. But do you go looking for these kinds of books in general, that historical fiction, but also comedy seems to be a running theme in these choices?
Yeah, it is kind of interesting because I don't think I go looking for books really. Like I do have an Audible subscription, right? And so things come up based on what I read. And sometimes I go, yeah, okay. And then some people will send me books that they think I might like. And then again, you know, recommendations from family and friends. And I tend to just take what kind of comes to me and read it.
Yeah, but then these are the kinds of ones that stick with you.
Yeah, and you know, in terms of I do tend to read some fairly serious stuff, but I do like the comedy as well as a kind of foil to that. And in particular, I seem to read biographies or memoirs of comedians. So not just Trevor Noah, but there's a really great book by Mike Myers called "Oh Canada,"
Oh,
which is
Oh, that sounds
a
cool.
very
yeah.
funny read about his life growing up in Canada and about his sort of feelings about Canada. And yeah, I read another one of them by Steve Patterson, who is, the CBC debaters host.
Mm.
If you've ever listened to that
Yeah,
show.
he's great.
Yeah, and very funny, a very funny book. So I don't know. I think I go through phases of what is it that I need now to read? What
Mm.
do I feel like? And that's how I've ended up with this kind of eclectic list, I guess.
And of this list of 5 books, would you like to
Mm.
expand on one of them?
Well, I was going to talk about Born a Crime, but I think you guys know all about it already.
Hmm.
And maybe because you don't know about The Country of the Blind, maybe I should talk about that one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
do it.
sure.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, so it's not like I go out looking for things to read about blindness necessarily. This one was recommended to me just because he also has RP, like I do, and his experience, was familiar to me, but also just because of his, like, he's a very good writer. That's his thing. He does. He writes for podcasts and radio and things like that, and he's able to take an issue, kind of break it down, and look at it from all kinds of perspectives. So, for instance, he talks about the difference between the National Federation of the Blind down south and the other one, which I can't remember the name of. But there's sort of historically, these two sort of big organizations and their history and the way that they each look at blindness and how the issues around blindness should be handled in society and through legislation, and etc. But he also gets into the nitty gritty about how he's dealing with it in his personal life, right? Like carrying his baby in a sling on the front of his, like his front sling,
Right.
in the subway with his
Oh,
cane, and
Mm-mm.
how people are sort of reacting to that.
oh,
Like all kinds of these little situations that we often find ourselves in, not only like the sort of practical part of trying to get through and solve those problems, but also the question of how you're being perceived.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of us maybe grapple with that.
Yes.
Like,
yes, yeah.
Yes.
it's something that's come up for me often, like less so now. I have a guide dog now, so it's like there's no question,
Right.
right? Like I'm blind now, right?
Mm-hmm.
But for him, he's going through this very gradual vision loss. And it's, am I blind yet? Or like if I sit on the subway and I read a book, uh, am I
Uh-huh.
blind? Right. So there's all of that in there as well. And you get to hear about his process of as an adult learning Braille. Like he dove in,
Uh-huh.
to what do I need to do to fully, prepare myself. And it's a fascinating read.
And do you know if this book was like commercially successful amongst like people who weren't already in the blind community? Because my issue with books like, well, it's not an issue, is an observation I've made with books like this is that it obviously resonates with people within the community, but has it
Yeah.
expanded outside of that? Do you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Yeah, I think because he already had a fairly high profile, position, um, before kind of coming out, quote unquote, as blind. He has had a lot, a lot of attention. I mean, he was a contributor to the New Yorker. Like he's sort of on that level of public discourse, let's
For
say.
people who aren't familiar with him, what did he do before this book?
Um, I should have gotten his bio out and refreshed, but he's a writer, and he has worked as a producer in
Okay.
Okay, okay.
radio
Okay.
and podcasting and things like that. So he, he's, and just because by virtue of being Neil Simon's grandson, he kind of moves in those circles,
Right.
that you might call, the elite of New York, let's say. And that, of course, has an influence everywhere.
Yeah.
And so he even deals with that a little bit in his book in terms of, let's say, privilege and how it relates to the experience of becoming blind and or living with blindness, and talks about how it might be different if he wasn't comfortably financially, and
Mm.
how poverty affects or is a sort of a can be much larger, too much of a part of the blind experience, and same thing with unemployment.
Well, it's highly
So
influential, I guess.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it's interesting because you have to caveat that, right? Like being where he
hmm
is and having what he has,
yeah,
he's got to be super transparent about that because, of course, that's the first question on our tongues, right? Like,
yeah.
how severed the community can feel in all of these different ways. But yeah, this is just a quick snippet off the web, and he says he's a writer, audio producer, editor, and a teacher living in Western Massachusetts.
Yes, right.
So I think what was interesting to me when you were describing the book is the way he presents the question. Because, being a person with low vision myself, there's that um, striking a balance of feeling, too sighted to be blind and too blind to be sighted, right?
hmm
Like that.
hmm
But for him, he was fully embracing the journey of going blind and
hmm
eventually going to be blind, and therefore, just as you said, deep dive right in, right? Learning Braille.
Yeah, and he has an analytical,
Yes.
bent to him, obviously as a writer,
Yeah.
and so he's going through this experience, and what else can he do but take it as an opportunity, I guess, really, to
Exactly.
document.
Yeah. But
And
that's
like the
so
title,
self-aware.
yeah, totally. And I love the title because it actually references a short story by H.G. Wells called The
Hmm.
Country of the Blind,
Hmm.
Okay.
which is about an explorer or something going through the, I don't know, Himalayas or somewhere, and he kind of gets separated from his party and ends up stumbling into this little valley where everyone's blind,
Mm.
and the villages all have been blind for generations. They don't actually understand what it means to be sighted, and so it's kind of, I love the title, and how, because I've often felt like it is a different country in a way, and for a while maybe you're a part-time resident of that country,
Right.
or you're kind of a visiting resident, but I don't know if I'm not sure who feels like they're full-time blind. I don't
Right.
know. What
Yeah.
does it feel like to be blind? These are all questions that I kind of like to think about sometimes, but not too long.
But what a way to go
Sometimes.
into that process of acceptance, right? Like compared to the
hmm
the resistance and the rigidity around keeping your old identity, like he's really went
Yeah.
into embracing going into it.
Right. And writing this book, it
Yeah.
sounds like it was clearly a huge part of that process.
Yeah.
And you
The
said that he
desire
was
to
hmm
be
involved
blind
in
almost.
producing in radio
Yeah.
and podcasting. Did he read his own book by any chance?
It's a really good question, because I did see an interview by him, and he talked about how he had just sort of finally given up print, like
Mm.
on paper.
Mm-hmm.
And
Oh,
he
right.
was being interviewed by I guess, a podcaster, or vlogger or something on his book. But the questions were often about the interacting with the printed word, right? And that's another question in the book. What does it mean to be literate, right? Like, do you need to really learn Braille to be literate? Because if
Mm.
you're only taking things in through your eyes, then are you, should kids who are blind, must they learn Braille to be literate? Or, because it'd be hard to say that, like James Joyce or Milton or something, who were blind later in life, weren't literate. They
Right.
were obviously fantastic authors and very literate. They no longer interacted with the printed page, right? So I think Andrew Leland was in the middle of that process of, I think he can still read, the printed page, but it's so much work that he just kind of said, that's it, I'm done.
It's not worth it.
Mm.
It's just not
No.
worth it. It's so much work.
Well, when you're taking in information, though, like we
Yeah.
know the kind of spectrum of opinions around this, right? Where Braille literacy is important for understanding grammar, understanding the
Yeah.
depths of the language. You're not necessarily getting that, but just audio feedback or so.
Yeah.
Or you're not getting the
Yeah.
parallel experience of reading print, I guess.
Exactly. And I, as somebody who has not tried to learn Braille, like I can so totally see
Right.
how important that would be. And I have worked with people who were, blind since birth and who use a screen reader totally, but their written documents are perfect.
Right. Interesting.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like immaculate. And so, it's
perfect
possible.
how? Perfect in terms of
Formatting.
writing or in formatting? Or both?
Well, both.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
genuinely
They
impressive.
take that in. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like a lot of work. But then I suppose, learning to read is also a lot
It's
of
a
work.
lot of
We're
work
just,
anyway. Yeah.
we're just not aware of it as much when we get older, how much work it was.
Julia,
Anyway.
it's such like this conversation was so interesting to me, and this book, which Jacob and I had no idea about, is definitely now on our radar. I think for a read because I'm very curious about this person's journey and how they portrayed it in the book. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. It's always a pleasure to talk to you guys.
Yeah, we're really excited, and we hope you'll come back. Well, I don't know, maybe in a year's time or so. But keep us posted on what you're reading. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
All right. Sounds great.
We were speaking to Julia Bonett, voice of AMI Audio, through her AMI Audio IDs. What? It was in the script.
No, that's true. I mean, if you listen to AMI Audio a lot, you've heard her
You've
voice
heard
a
her.
lot.
You got it.
And it sure is buttery smooth.
Yes.
But
And
you know who else has a buttery smooth voice?
God, so
Our
excited.
guest next week, which we've been so excited, been keeping this under wraps for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
We are interviewing Julia Wellen, author of My Oxford Year. And thank you for listening. Actually, author-rater. She also
Yes.
narrated her own books. She's also a narrator for hundreds of other audiobooks.
Seriously?
Literally.
Wow.
Amongst
Including
them,
my favorite, obviously, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue.
Yeah, The Invisible Life of Addie
Thanks for
LaRue.
shouting that out.
Educated by Tara Westover. I absolutely loved that one.
Mm.
But yeah, we want to, if you have any questions for her, please email us at, what's our email address?
Feedback@ami.ca. You can email us. You can also leave us a voicemail. We love hearing people's voices. Come on, send us voicemails. 1-866-509-4545. Yeah, just call us. Leave us your listener question for Julia Whalen. We would love to feature it. Our book club is sending us questions
We've already got a bunch.
as we speak. Exactly. Yeah, because we're all very excited. That's it.
That's it.
That's it for us today. We'll be back next week. Of course, weekly episodes of AMI Audiobook Review on your favorite podcast platform. I'm your host, Ramia Amadin, with co-host and producer Jacob Szymanski, technical producer Nasreen Abdelmajid. And until next time, happy audiobook listening.